The Salem Witch Trials took place over 300 years ago, a historical event so well known, it's crossed into legend. The mere mention of Salem calls to mind the silhouetted image of a witch soaring through the moonlight over a darkened New England forest, conspiring with black cats, brewing noxious potions, and spell books written in blood. But the truth of what happened here in 1692 was much less magical, and in fact was so horrific and strange that the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony had most of the records and documents destroyed. And to this day, it remains one of America's greatest mysteries. What really happened in Salem back in 1692? And what ghosts have lingered? In this episode, we'll explore the legacy of the witch trials in Salem and the impact its story has had on popular culture. We'll visit various museums and historical sites as we deep dive into the history and numerous theories behind what led the afflicted girls to cry witch. The fingers began to point. We'll learn why local author Nathaniel Hawthorne believed that his family was cursed. And finally, we'll get to the ghosts. 20 innocent people were executed in Salem in 1692, and their vengeful spirits have proven bloodthirsty. This town's story is a dark stain upon American history, blood that can never be washed away. Yet its notorious reputation has proven anything but a detraction from its immensely popular tourism industry. So leash up your favorite furry familiar and join me in Salem, Massachusetts.
Where in the world are you hiding, my dear, my dear? I caught a glimpse of something very weird. A ghost, I fear, is near me, dear. A ghost has slipped into my world, my world.
Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. For a town that once hanged accused witches from the gallows, Salem has taken quite a turn. Salem now brands itself as the Witch City, and it's become something of a supernatural mecca for tourists. Quirky museums, magic shops, walking tours, haunted houses. Pick your poison. So something about Salem just screams ladies' weekend. So joining me on this adventure, I have Liz, Susie, and Ruby. And we're gonna try and show you everything there is to see and do in Salem, but it's a lot for one weekend, so wish us luck. Salem's emergence as a pop culture icon began back in the 1970s when the popular television series Bewitched filmed a 3-episode arc.
But truth be told, what most people don't realize, she is the reason we have tourism. Prior to this show being out, Salem didn't want it. They wanted to take the witch trials and shove them under a rug. We all see how well that worked for them. By 1982, we're gonna host our very first Haunted Happenings. So now though, Haunted Happenings runs October 1st through October 31st, and the crowds here match the numbers of the New York ball drop. Yep. 2.7 million people trickled through Salem last year. This right here is Essex Street, right behind you. The first weekend.
Today, Salem is a thriving city of 8 square miles with 45,000 residents. Every year, they welcome millions of tourists, and most in the month of October.
Visiting Salem in October is chaotic. The streets are packed, especially Essex Street right here. So it's packed, it's absolutely mobbed, it's hard to find parking.
All the time in October, like
All the time. It doesn't matter if it's 10 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday or if it's Saturday night, it's going to be jammed.
You should expect it to be really crazy. There's no way to describe it well enough to make people understand just how crowded it is in Salem. If you think of Mardi Gras in New Orleans, so doesn't matter how well you plan, there are going to be people here, there's going to be traffic. Just go with it and enjoy the natural vibes of the place.
Everybody's happy, everybody's
vibes.
excited. Yeah, the energy feels really cool, it feels really good. You'll walk down the street, there's people dressed up, there's all sorts of dancers and performances, there's always something to do. So it's really fun. It's really fun if you mentally prep for there being a lot of people around you.
So we are visiting in the month of August, and I highly recommend visiting in the summer if you want to beat the crowds. Also, it's wicked pretty. We're staying here at the Hawthorne Hotel. It was built in 1925 and named after local author Nathaniel Hawthorne, whom you probably know from the Scarlet Letter. Fun fact, he was also the great-grandson of the hanging judge, John Hathorne. More on both later. And yes, the hotel is reportedly haunted. Ranked as one of the most haunted hotels in America, this historic property potentially accommodates both the living and the dead. And is host to the famous Salem Witches Halloween Ball. But you have to book about a year in advance. We're gonna come back tonight and do some ghost hunting at the hotel. But for now, we're gonna hit the town, go to some of the museums, and learn about the Salem Witch Trials. Hey, remember to hit that subscribe button. And also consider joining the Ghost Club on Patreon for extended stories and exclusive bonus content. 100% of your contributions go toward making this channel possible. Now back to Salem. The Puritans arrived in Salem in 1626. They were a group of zealous English Protestants with a highly patriarchal society and stringent rules. The Puritans essentially left England because the church wasn't pure enough, and they believed they were establishing a visionary city on a hill in the New World. However, they lived in dim, smoky, firelit homes perched on the edge of the wild Maine frontier. There were constant brutal and bloody skirmishes with the French and Native Americans. In addition to the constant territory wars, the townspeople also feared starvation and disease. Crops were failing, livestock was dying, and relations between villagers were strained to the point of outright hatred. Ghosts. 3 generations had endured since Salem's founding, but the winter of 1692 was among the coldest on record. Times were hard, and people were afraid. Add to this the fact that their charter from the English king had been revoked, leaving the Massachusetts Bay Colony essentially in governmental limbo. And the stage was set for a perfect storm of witchcraft hysteria. It's wild thinking they had entire families inside these small houses. Could we live here together?
in this.
Yeah.
Live and work.
Yeah. It's not terrifying at all, these houses. Totally comfy. The Salem Witch Trials began in February of 1692. 14 women, 5 men, and 2 dogs were hung. 1 man was crushed to death by stones, and 5 perished in jail awaiting trial. The youngest accused was only 4 years old, and the oldest was nearly 80.
This is our Witch Trial Memorial. This is the most important place in Salem when it comes to the witch trials themselves, because this is the only place you can come and pay your respects to those who lost their lives. Now, they always ask me the same question as a tour guide. Well, where are the witches? And my answer is always the same. Oh, we're here now. But there were none here in 1692. These are innocent people.
They were scapegoats, victims of paranoia, religious fervor, and a flawed justice system. Ironically, if you confessed you were a witch, apologized, and pointed a finger at someone else, they would set you free.
If you were hanged in 1692 for being a witch, do you think for 1 second they're going to let you be in one of our cemeteries? Not a chance. Instead, they dug a little hole. They called it a pit, a witch pit. And whomever died that day will be thrown in there together. For instance, the last day, September 22nd, 8 people will hang. 8 people will be shoved into that little hole and very shallowly covered up.
So many documents were destroyed that we don't know the actual number, but somewhere between 144 and 185 witches were arrested before the crisis passed. As Stacy Schiff wrote in her book, The Witches, Salem comes down to us pockmarked by 17th century deletions and studded with 19th century inventions. Perhaps you've come to know Salem through Arthur Miller's famous play, The Crucible, which is based on historical fact. However, in Salem's case, the truth is far stranger and incredibly more complex than fiction.
I saw you sign the devil's book!
Man, it's getting windy. This would be great for recording audio. That boat over there is the Friendship of Salem, or actually it's a replica of the Friendship of Salem, which was a merchant vessel built here in 1797. And I think it traveled all over the world. So back in the day, Salem was way bigger. And here by the sea was known as Salem Town. The population was about 2,500, and this is where the wealthy merchants and businessmen lived. And out to the west, in the farmlands, that was known as the Salem Village, and that was the epicenter of all the activity. The population out there was only about 500 people, and Salem Village is actually known by a different name today. It is the town of Danvers. You will need to hop in a car to get to Danvers. It was about a 10-minute drive from the Hawthorne Hotel. Here, you can still visit the home of Rebecca Nurse, the oldest woman to be executed, whose main crime seemed to be her adoption of a Quaker child, but in reality, she was accused by a vengeful neighbor. You see, the Putnams of Salem Village were a powerful family of finger pointers. And they had been in a decades-long property dispute with Rebecca Nurse and her family. And the accused witches had to forfeit their land.
Because the minute that you enter a plea of any kind, they took anything from you that made money. So I'm going to take your cows. I'm going to sell and auction them off to help pay for the dues owed for your court and your jail stay. Once you're convicted to die, which everyone was, I'm going to take your land and home too. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I just did. I'm going to auction and sell it off. So these guys are making buku money. Now, that being said, the Peabody Essex has provided us an amazing map that kind of details this for you. Those that are being accused have a triangle. Those that are doing the accusing have a square. And what you're going to notice is a definitive line. People up here away from the water are accusing those that have better plots of land. Because there's 3 easy steps if you coveted your neighbor's land. Number 1, I'm going to accuse you of being a witch. Number 2, I'm going to sit back and wait because they're going to start taking your stuff. And number 3, I'm going to be the highest bidder to get your piece of property. If you coveted your neighbor's land back in 1692, that was how you got it.
So also at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead, you'll find this. It's a replica of the old Salem meeting house. Let's take a look. The accusers, including the Putnams, were also the most puritanical of the villagers, who all supported the new village reverend, Samuel Parris, who was against the controversial halfway covenant. You see, by 1692, church membership was beginning to diminish, and so, in an effort to encourage new members, some churches, like the one in Salem town, adopted the halfway covenant, which applied less stringent rules for admission. So, as I said, there's a variety of complex factors at work. Despite over 40 people testifying in her defense and a temporary reprieve granted by Governor Phipps, Rebecca Nurse was hanged in July of 1692. Her body was moved here by her devoted family and is the only known burial location of any of the 19 victims. The Putnams would go on to accuse more than 100 people during the Salem Witch Trials, including 18 of the 20 who were executed. And up the road, you'll find the ruins of the parsonage of Samuel Parris. I don't think Danvers likes the witchcraft tourism very much. I definitely had some ladies glaring at me as I was walking on the sidewalk, and then you basically just walk through a bunch of people's backyards to get to the site, and there's no parking, so you really got to come looking for it. This is where it all began. Behind me are the ruins of the Salem Village Parsonage, where Reverend Samuel Parris and his family once lived. In the winter of 1692, the Reverend Samuel Parris discovered his 12-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, twisting and writhing upon the floor beneath a chair. Her screams pierced the quiet of their small house, and for days, Abigail was seized with fits of torment. She claimed to be pinched and bitten. Soon after, Betty Parris, the Reverend's 8-year-old daughter, became afflicted with the same symptoms. After a month of no improvement, a local doctor examined Abigail and Betty and found nothing physically wrong. His diagnosis? They were under an evil hand. And from that moment on, the girls were no longer being asked what was hurting them, but who. The devil, witches, and ghosts were as commonplace to the Puritans as livestock and firewood. They believed that the devil acted through human agents. To make a deal with the devil, one simply needed to sign their name in his book. They would then receive an earthly reward. But in exchange, these evil agents would wreak havoc upon their communities. So things like disease, dead livestock, a bad harvest, bad weather, they were all commonly believed to be the devil's work. As the news swept through the village, more girls became afflicted. It was then that the fingers began to point. At first, the afflicted girls gave 3 names. The first women accused could all be considered outsiders. Sarah Good, a rather surly beggar woman. Sarah Osborne, a scandalous woman who married her younger servant and, due to illness, had not attended church in over a year. And Tituba, the Reverend Parris's slave who had served his family since their years in Barbados. The women were arrested on February 29th. They were questioned by the magistrates from Salem town, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, both imposing figures and harsh interrogators. At first, the women all pled innocent, but then Tituba took the stand. By order of Reverend Samuel Parris, she had been brutally beaten, and so, in fear of her life, she decided to give the interrogators what they wanted. She began to rave about witchcraft, about a tall man in a black coat, yellow birds, translucent cats, a hairy figure that walked on 2 legs, women flying through the air on poles, and the devil himself, who presented her with a book upon which she laid her mark. She also included that she saw the names of 9 other witches. And then everyone went crazy. Historian Stacy Schiff writes, "It was as if Tituba had handed out hallucinogens, the terrifying psychedelic confession, rather than the voodoo of legend, was her contribution to the events of 1692. Over the next 9 months, accusations multiplied as others, like Tituba, made false confessions to save themselves. And the afflicted girls, like Abigail Williams, held their audience captive with continued tales of supernatural horror. It's likely that Abigail and many of the other afflicted had been introduced to such imaginative stories through Tituba, who in her role as nurse would have often entertained the girls with stories, and perhaps some occasional fortune-telling. It's also important to note that Abigail Williams seemed to share her nurse's flair for the dramatic arts. At one point, Abigail described a crowd of 40 witches gathered for a devil's supper in her uncle's pasture, where they drank the blood of the afflicted from silver goblets. When the new governor arrived in May of 1692, the court of Oyer and Terminer was established, allowing the executions to proceed legally. Up until this point, all the accused were simply packed into a disease-ridden prison, which flooded each day with the incoming tide. As the trials continued on, the judges essentially presumed guilt and preferred confessions. The court accepted all kinds of dubious evidence, including spectral evidence reported from the girls as they thrashed and raved in court, often describing their hallucinations in vivid detail. It's important to note that Puritans believed that no one ever lied, or else they would damn their souls to hell. Complicating matters further, the jury were personally biased. Many were relatives of the afflicted girls, and those who dared to speak out or suspected the girls of lying eventually found themselves clapped in irons.
The ones that are doing the accusing and prosecuting, seemingly from today's standards, let me rephrase, from today's standards would have been the one practicing witchcraft. So let me explain why. When you open this book up, the first thing you're going to notice is how to make a witch cake. You're going to take the urine from an afflicted child and you're going to mix it into some cornmeal and flour and you're going to bake it to look like this. You have to let it cool. It's very important because you're going to feed it to the dog, and whoever the dog runs to is certainly the witch. As preposterous as that sounds, can you imagine that being your dog? No, I don't know. Don't come to mama now.
Yum yum. We best friends forever now, Ruby?
In the ice cream.
By the spring of 1793, the new governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, Sir William Phipps, ended the trials when his own wife was accused. The prisoners were released, sentences amended, and the arrest stopped. By 1702, the trials had been ruled unlawful. So it leads you to wonder, what happened to Salem in the aftermath? And finally, we get to the ghosts. This is the home of Judge Jonathan Corwin. It's over 400 years old, and it's the only surviving structure in Salem with direct ties to the witch trials. Eventually, one judge and 12 jurors apologized for their part in the persecution. But Jonathan Corwin stood silent. Perhaps it is for this reason. They say his family was cursed. Judge Corwin was an extremely successful merchant when he purchased this extravagant home in 1675. But by 1718, 8 Corwin lives were lost to premature death, and the family's estate collapsed. The Corwin house officially opened to the public as a museum in 1948, and ever since, there has been a steady supply of paranormal encounters by staff and visitors alike. A woman in a long orange skirt is seen walking up the stairs, only to disappear on the second floor. Once, a wall sconce was hurled across the room in broad daylight. Shadow figures are known to move about the attic, especially after closing. And because of this, over the years, a number of staff members have refused to enter the building after dark. It is uncertain who or what haunts the witch house, but it could perhaps have something to do with a few curious objects kept inside, such as this old poppet found in the nearby house of Bridget Bishop, the first accused to be hanged. Many believe that this poppet maintains residual energy. Next on our list of haunted houses, we find the House of the Seven Gables. And it seems like they're having an outdoor music festival today. You know who else never apologized? Judge John Hathorne. And though his former home has been destroyed, this property is associated with his family. Once known as the Turner Ingersoll Mansion, this home was the inspiration for Nathaniel Hawthorne's Gothic novel. The story takes place in a haunted mansion, in a home built atop land that was acquired from a witchcraft trial, and follows the Pynchon family, who are cursed by a dark history of greed, betrayal, and murder. And it's all based upon his great-grandfather, Judge John Hathorne, a man who presumed guilt, admitted spectral evidence, and backed the accusers, and, like Corwin, never showed remorse for any of it. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born in Salem in 1804. The House of the Seven Gables belonged to his cousin, Susanna, who educated young Nathaniel on their family history. He was so ashamed of his family legacy that they say he added the W to his name to distance himself from his ancestors. He was so haunted by his family's sins that at the beginning of his most famous work, he issued a public apology.
Two gingers in the heat.
She went right up to you. So much black.
I know, I'm sorry. I don't have a lint
I
roller.
love you so much. I have so much black.
Oh, look at her nipples.
She's like, just give me a kiss.
Judge Hathorne passed away in 1717 at the age of 76, and he's buried here at the Old Burying Point Cemetery, which is the second oldest cemetery in the entire country. It was founded in 1637.
And you only see about half of the gravestones that have been placed in here over the last 400 years. A lot of them have been destroyed by the weather, tree branches, lawnmowers. A lot of them have been stolen over the years. In Boston, they had an issue with bakers stealing the slate tombstones to bake bread on.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, haunted bread.
Being one of the oldest cemeteries in the country, the graveyard is chock full of death's head tombstones and ghostly legends. Nearly 400 years worth of local accounts, including a lady in white. Perhaps she's the spirit of one of the condemned. though most believe she was an Irish Catholic immigrant. Another ghostly woman appears with her son. They are thought to be victims of a fire. And there's a third woman who is spotted most frequently.
It is Mary Corey, Giles Corey's second wife, whom he may or may not have knocked down the stairs. Her ghost is often seen hovering around her own gravestone.
You know what other famous figure is also associated with this graveyard? Blackbeard. For that story, find me on Patreon. As mentioned earlier, not all of the accused were hanged. So let's talk about Giles Corey, the one man who was slowly pressed to death. He was a farmer known about the village for his stubbornness and fondness for suing his neighbors. By all accounts, Corey was not a great guy. He even testified against his own wife during the trials. But Giles Corey was aware of the ways of the law, and he refused to plead guilty or not guilty. So instead, Sheriff George Corwin, by all accounts a total sadist, attempted to torture a confession out of him by placing a wooden door upon his back and slowly piling on the stones. This lasted for 3 days, and they say that Corey's last words were "more weight." It was a gruesome death, but the lack of a conviction protected his property, ensuring it would be passed on to his children, though that was not Corey's only legacy. According to local legend, the apparition of Giles Corey appears in Salem each time a disaster is about to strike the city.
June 25th, 1914, some people were walking by Howard Street, and they look in and they see an old man in old garb standing under a tree. And they say, "Sir, are you okay?" No response. They go into the cemetery to try to find him. They can't find him. He disappeared. All day long, the sheriff gets calls. "There's an old man lost in the cemetery. You better go find him." And they spend all day looking for him. Nothing. The very next day, 100 yards away from where Giles Corey's wife was hanged for witchcraft, a fire breaks out in a factory and levels half of the city of Salem. It was the Great Salem Fire of 1914, destroyed thousands of houses, displaced 20,000 people. And that fire only ended when it hit the ocean, despite the best efforts of 12 different fire departments. They say that the old man in that cemetery that day was Giles Corey, coming back to get his revenge on the city of Salem. To this day, on Howard Street, there's a local legend that if you see an old man walking up and down the road, if you see him, you are going to be in danger. If he talks to you, you are supposed to die within 24 hours. So when you're walking back to the train tonight and you see an old man on the other side, just don't say a word.
He also left behind a curse upon Sheriff George Corwin, who not soon after the trials ended began to suffer from what we would now call sleep paralysis. He would wake up unable to move, with the feeling of a great weight being pressed upon his chest, and the ghoulish figure of Giles Corey at the foot of his bed, watching. He suffered from a rare blood disorder and was found dead in his bed of a heart attack in 1696. He was only 29 years old. Today, the Merchant Hotel sits upon the land that once belonged to Sheriff Corwin, and many claim that it is haunted by the vengeful spirits of both Sheriff Corwin and Giles Corey. And the curse did not stop there, for every sheriff of Essex County over the course of 300 years has either died or resigned due to heart or blood-related ailments. The curse was said to have been broken when the sheriff's office finally moved from Salem to Middleton in 1991. And lastly, we come to Bridget Bishop, and as is the case with Salem, the details are murky. We know she was a woman from the town, not the village, who owned land, including an apple orchard, and she likely sold cider.
Bridget Bishop's going to be the first one they hang, although not the first accused. She's a woman, she's an easy target. But Bridget was a little different than a normal Puritan lady. She was a bit outspoken. She wore red. She showed a little bosom. She owned property. She'd been married 3 times. For all these things, today we'd be like, hey girl, how you doing? But back then, the Puritans viewed her as a threat to their own kind. They treated her like scum, even though she was a productive member of the society with her apple orchard. She would take care of her neighbors. They didn't care about that. They used her to set another example of fear, though. They shackled and chained her to a cart, being the first one. They paraded her around Salem Town and Salem Village before they finally ended up at Gallows Hill, which today we call Proctor's Ledge. They would get her up there, they kicked the bucket from underneath her feet, and she strangled for 32 minutes before she actually died.
If you're looking for a nice dinner on the town, head to Turner's Seafood. But be forewarned, it sits upon the land that once belonged to Bridget Bishop.
She has been seen in this building on many occasions. Waitresses will see a woman in a red dress in the building. They'll say, ma'am, are you looking for the bathroom? She'll disappear. They'll see her upstairs. They'll go up to get napkins and other supplies. She'll disappear.
Once, a late-night diner was confused when a second manager came to his table to inquire about the service. He stated that a woman in a red dress had just checked on him minutes prior. The manager, quite confused by this, told the man that if he believed in such things, he may have just seen a ghost. All right, so we're back at the Hawthorne Hotel. We're gonna go inside, do a little ghost hunting. Since the grand opening in 1925, the Hawthorne Hotel has earned international acclaim for its beauty and its ghosts. A lot of the paranormal activity seems to center on the 3rd and 6th floors. So we're here on the 3rd floor, which has some of the more disturbing, freaky stories. So we're just gonna walk the hallways and see if we get any needle hits. It is an active hotel, so we can't really conduct EVP sessions. You're just gonna get chatter in all the rooms, but we'll see if we get any needle hits. Room 325 is considered the most active room. Guests have awakened to phantom knocks, rattling locks, and on one occasion, a woman traveling with her 8-year-old son woke up to discover him cowering in the corner with wet pajamas. He told her he was too afraid to go back into the bathroom because there was another boy inside. So it's a suite, so it's a double wide room. So this is also 325. Are there any spirits present in this hotel, especially here on the 3rd floor? If you want to make yourself known by moving the needle, we're here paying attention. Others have also reported the disembodied crying of a child in the night, as well as faucets turning on and off, and a presence standing behind them in the bathroom, breathing hard upon the back of their necks. Would you stay in this room after you heard those stories? On the 6th floor, the figure of a woman has been spotted within the mirrors, walking the halls, or lingering at the foot of the bed, sometimes reaching out to touch the living with icy, dead fingers. Some have wondered if this could be the spirit of Bridget Bishop, but there is no conclusive proof. The theory was that this land was also once a part of her apple orchard, but it's been largely disproven. So, besides the wayward spirits of the executed witches, there are a few other possibilities. For starters, another building used to stand in this same location. The Franklin Building was erected in 1809. It caught fire 4 times, finally burning to the ground in 1860. Some believe this traumatic event has left a psychic residue. Then, directly next to the Hawthorne, you'll find the Salem Common, where they used to conduct public punishments, like whippings. And right across the street is one of the most famous murder houses in American history, the Gardner Pingree House, known for the 1830 murder of Captain Joseph White. And wait, you haven't heard of it? Well, then perhaps you've heard of Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. Poe took inspiration from the shocking true life story. If you want to learn more about the Hawthorne Hotel and its many ghosts, you can find an extended video on the channel. Good morning. I would definitely recommend the Hawthorne Hotel if you're planning to visit Salem. But remember, if you're coming for Halloween, book a year in advance. So we're here wrapping it up with some ice cream in Salem. I gotta say, in preparation for this trip, I read a book, The Witches by Stacy Schiff. I listened to a 12-part podcast. We've been on 2 history tours, countless museums, and almost every one of them has told a different version of the story. So, Liz, what do you think, after hearing everything this weekend, what do you think actually happened? Like, what were these girls thinking? What were they doing? What was up with the afflicted girls?
I mean, I can't help but to chalk it up to these girls just being bored and wanting attention, letting their imaginations run a little too wild, and then their parents sort of seizing on that and using it for their own agenda.
Well, it was a massively patriarchal society. So the fact that a bunch of young adolescent girls even had a voice is remarkable. I know one of the tours in one of the museums all said that, they weren't even the first ones to make the accusations. Only men were allowed to make accusations, right. And their families told them the names to say. They fed them the names, and essentially, if the girls went to trial and didn't say what their families wanted them to say, they would take them home and beat them. Yeah. So they were also just being, forced to say these things. And maybe one of them had epilepsy or had mental health issues, but
I don't know.
I mean, they would literally sit in the courtroom and go, "Oh, a yellow bird, ah," and they'd all scream and point. That's...
Yeah, but have you ever seen...
That's like middle school drama.
Exactly.
Some people even admitted that they were lying. Yeah. And then the judges were like, no, the devil's got you. Now you're lying. Now you're actually lying. You weren't
technically,
lying
if they were lying, the devil would have them anyway. Right? Wasn't that...
I can't believe they said... Somebody said the Puritans believed that no one lied because if you told one lie, you would go to hell. So that was how their justice system worked, is they just assumed no one was lying because they didn't want to damn their souls. But they were all...
I wonder how that worked out for them.
So the question remains, if not witchcraft, what afflicted the girls? Theories range from mass hysteria to ergot poisoning causing LSD-like hallucinations to mental health issues like epilepsy or PTSD from the massacres in Maine. Or some point the finger at more common explanations like overactive imaginations, boredom, spite, or fear. This was a class of adolescent girls in a society where women were told to be humble and silent, suddenly thrust into the limelight and asked to speak in public in front of a court, demanding that they find witches. Likely, it was a combination of many factors and long-held neighborly grudges, but ultimately the reason for their behavior remains unknown. What we do know is that adult men accepted wild accusations by young girls as hard evidence, and their notion of extreme right proved extremely wrong. Guilt and blame have haunted Salem ever since. It seems that Salem has learned a lesson from the legacy of its past, and today you'll find a community that strives to be welcoming and embrace all. I am the Ghost Tourist. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
A ghost I feel